We got confirmation, not that we needed it, of the bitter rivalry which existed between him and Alain Prost at the end of the next season in 1989. They were fighting again for the World Championship. Either of them could win it. They got to that notorious chicane at the end of the Suzuka circuit on lap 47 out of 53, and Senna attempted to force his way through, as he had done with Prost several times previously that season, but this time Prost wasn't prepared to put up with it, and either deliberately or accidentally, it's very controversial even to this day, he turned in and took Ayrton Senna out.
Now, there are very few cars left on the circuit. There's 14 running now out of the 26 who started. And if Prost comes up to any of them, this is the opportunity that Senna's looking for. And he's going through. Out! Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. They meet. This is what we were fearing might happen during the race. And that means to say that Prost has won the World Championship. Alain Prost, World Champion of 1989.
Now, there have been some bitter rivalries, inter-team hatred situations over the years. I remember Nuvolari and Varzi. I remember Nigel Mansell and Nelson Piquet and others. None of them exceeded that between Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost. We'd seen the climax in 1989 when they had that coming together. Quite incredibly, now with Alain Prost for Ferrari and Ayrton Senna for McLaren, exactly the same thing happened at Japan at exactly the same circuit, Suzuka, the following year. Either Prost or Senna could win the World Championship, and for reasons that I won't bore you with now, Senna was on the wrong side of the grid from his point of view, and he decided that if Prost did better than he did, Prost starting second and Senna from pole position, Senna was going to be prepared to take him out at the first corner. And amazingly, that's exactly what happened.
The grid is clear, the lights go, and Senna sprints away, but Alain Prost takes the lead. It's happened. Alain Prost has taken the advantage. Senna is trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately. This is amazing. Senna goes off at the first corner, but what has happened to Prost? He has gone off too. Well, that is amazing, but I fear absolutely predictable.
People ask me what the greatest race I've ever seen is. I don't know without doing a gigantic amount of research, and then it would be debatable. I don't have any doubts about what the greatest lap I've ever seen, though. We had a European Grand Prix at Donington in 1993. Tom Wheatcroft had at last achieved his life's ambition of having a Grand Prix at the circuit that he owned. Very sadly for Tom, the weather was absolutely ghastly. But as a result of it, we saw something that, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed could happen. Ayrton started from fourth on the grid in the McLaren. He didn't make all that good a start. He dropped to fifth position. But from then on, it was Senna all the way. On that one lap, he passed Michael Schumacher, he passed Carl Wendlinger, he passed Damon Hill, and he passed Alain Prost. Can I say three of those names again? Schumacher, Hill and Prost. And he passed them all on that first lap. He took the lead, he dominated the race thereafter, and he won imperiously. It was an unbelievable drive.
And Wendlinger is coming up. Well, Senna is crowded out and is down to fifth position. And Wendlinger is up into third place ahead of Schumacher. Brilliant start by the Austrian driver in the black Sauber. Prost leads, Hill second, Wendlinger is third, and Ayrton Senna is up to fourth position ahead of Schumacher and challenging Wendlinger as they go round the right-hander into the old hairpin. Senna is up to third.
And after being crowded at the start, a quite brilliant couple of corners by Ayrton Senna. Tremendous stuff. He muscled his way back into the contention at Redgate. He's going inside Damon Hill. And Senna into second place already. And he's giving it absolutely everything in the wet part of the race.
And Senna goes through into the lead. He's passed Alain Prost, so the McLaren leads, Prost second, Hill is third, a tremendous gap between the third and fourth cars.
Murray, you touched earlier on the special relationship that Senna enjoyed with Gerhard Berger. Can you elaborate a little on this?
They got together in 1990 when Alain Prost had gone off to Ferrari in a huff. One of the things that you could not say about Ayrton Senna was that he was essentially a light-hearted chap. He was a very serious and dedicated bloke, and Gerhard Berger is just the opposite. And putting these two together was exactly what each of them needed, because Gerhard Berger decided he was going to show Ayrton Senna that you could have a bit of fun in life, and by the same token, Berger learned from Senna that dedication and application can improve your game. But I mean, some of the things that went on with Senna and Berger were quite incredible. A friend of mine was being taken by Berger to his hotel, and he said, "A dreadful smell in this car, Gerhard. What is it?" "Oh, that is the fish. The fish," said Berger. I said, "What fish is it?" "Ah, they'll show you." So they stopped the car, and this was in Brazil, where there's about 40-degree heat, and Berger brings out a box from the back of the car which was full of fish heads, stinking fish heads in the Brazil heat. And he talked himself into Ayrton Senna's bedroom, and he distributed these fish heads all round the room, stunk the place out. And then on another occasion, Gerhard was in his room, and he gets a telephone call from Senna, and Senna said, "Have you put these live frogs in my room?" "Yes," said Gerhard. "How many have you found?" 16, said Senna. "There are another 10 to go," he said. Put 26 live frogs in Senna's bedroom. I mean, some of these stories people will find quite absolutely appalling, but Berger was in his room, and Senna gets the foam fire extinguisher off the wall of the hotel and stuffs the nozzle of it underneath the door of Gerhard Berger's room and fills it with fire extinguisher foam. But I think probably the best one was when Senna, who travelled with diplomatic privileges, arrives in Venezuela on his way home to Brazil, or on a promotional visit or something. And he's met, as usual, by somebody from the Brazilian embassy who says, "Would you give me your passport, Mr. Senna, and I'll get you through immigration." So Senna gives him his passport, and the chap comes back looking very embarrassed. He said, "I'm afraid we have a bit of a problem, Mr. Senna." "What's that then, Senna?" So he shows Senna his passport, and Berger had cut his picture out of it and substituted it with a photograph of 2 large black breasts. And in response to this, Senna gets hold of Berger's wallet with all his credit cards in and superglued the whole lot together. I mean, I could go on like this forever, Bruce, but they did each other a lot of good. But in 1994 I saw another side of Ayrton Senna, and that was in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and he invited me to have a look at the Senna business empire. Senna was a brilliant businessman as well as a brilliant driver and a great personality, and he has this 16-story skyscraper in Sao Paulo which was his alone, and on top of which was a heliport, and Ayrton used to fly in from home, land at the heliport, walk down 1 story into his office. And he took me round, and the top story was his, which he shared with his father Milton, and they ran the business from, and his brother. And then he had a floor for the Senna Audi business in Brazil. He was the Audi distributor for Brazil. He had a floor for the Senna Ford business in Brazil. He was one of the biggest Ford agents in Brazil. He had a floor for the Senina magazine, and Senina was a little cartoon character who was modelled on Ayrton Senna, and he did good and he righted wrongs. He was a sort of Robin Hood figure in Brazil, and he was mega because he went on not only into other South American countries, but was about to be introduced into Japan as well. And then he sold me the Senna promotions business, and all this was going to be developed after he had retired, so that it would keep him in his old age. Not that he was exactly looking for money, but sadly, just a very short time after that, at that dreadful weekend in Imola, we lost Senna, one of the greatest drivers there has ever been.
Murray, following Senna's very sad death at the start of 1994, Michael Schumacher appears to have picked up the mantle, and he is the driver to beat in Formula One these days. How do you find him?
Good question, Bruce, and I'm delighted to be able to answer it, because I get very, very irritated when I read things and hear people saying that Michael Schumacher is an arrogant, self-opinionated German. The only thing that's true about that statement is that he's a German. I believe in this life you have to speak as you find, and Michael Schumacher, in my experience, has never been anything other than extremely friendly, extremely cheerful, extremely willing to muck in and be talked about. And when you are talking to him, he demonstrates a quite incredible fluency in what is to him a foreign language, and most people either ignore or forget that. And not only is he incredibly fluent, but he's gigantically authoritative and comprehensive. So as far as I'm concerned, he's a thoroughly decent, all-round nice guy who also is always the first to congratulate someone who does better than him, and always the first to give credit to somebody where credit is due. So I have absolutely no adverse criticisms about him as a person, and no one goes further than me in praising him as a driver. In fact, it was always very clear from the beginning that we got a superstar on our hands, right from his first Grand Prix in his career, and that was at Belgium in 1991, when this young German that we only knew as a sports car driver for Mercedes-Benz appears in the Jordan team. And I was actually in the Jordan garage looking at all the times that you get on the monitors from the Tag Heuer stuff, and I see this name Schumacher appear seventh in the order for the grid. And I thought, hello, he's a bloke that's worth watching. So I stayed there for most of the rest of the weekend and watched this young Michael Schumacher at work. And I saw a very calm, authoritative, relaxed bloke who was clearly going far. And I'm not saying this with all the benefit of hindsight, it was obvious at the time. Now, he didn't do all that well in his first Grand Prix. Indeed, he burnt his clutch out immediately after the start, but that was inexperience. And the more experience he got, the more he benefited from it, and very, very quickly indeed. And it was just 1 year later, at the same race, Belgium in Spa, a circuit that he's more or less made his own. And we all know that Spa is probably the toughest and most demanding circuit of the lot. It's just a year later when he won his first Grand Prix for Benetton. And one of the many things that I like about Michael Schumacher, and he showed it par excellence there, is that when he's on the podium and he's on the top step of the podium, instead of looking as though you've given him £5 and taken a tenner back, he puts his hands in the air and he jumps about and he smiles and he actually looks pleased. It's almost indecent to look pleased if you've done well these days, but not Schumacher, and it was wonderful to see after a great race.
Now Michael Schumacher on lap 44 comes out of the right-hander now. He's only got a short distance between himself and a historic victory. That's Johnny Herbert retiring. Rotten luck in the Lotus. 23 years old, the youngest Grand Prix winner for a long time. The first win for Benetton since the Canadian Grand Prix last year. The first win ever for Michael Schumacher. And he puts his arm out and he is naturally elated.
Now, I've said that it was obvious from the beginning that Michael Schumacher was a superstar. 93 wasn't his year in terms of winning the World Championship, because that was Alain Prost's year. It was Prost's fourth World Championship. He was in the Williams Renault, the best car of all. But in 94, notwithstanding that Schumacher had all sorts of setbacks, like being disqualified from Belgium. I talked about him doing well at Belgium. Yeah, he won in 1994, but he had it taken away from him because of a technical infringement. And he had those comings together with Damon Hill, British Grand Prix where he was disqualified, Italy where he went out. And then we had that gigantically controversial collision in Australia where he won the World Championship and Damon Hill didn't. But he had nevertheless become world champion. And one of the races that I will always remember is Spain in 1995. Sometimes, not very often, but sometimes you get a race where a driver can do no wrong, and that was Spain in 95. Schumacher started in pole position. that was in spite of the fact that they had had all sorts of handling problems. They made very dramatic setup to their changes to the car overnight. He won the race from lights to the flag, and he beat Johnny Herbert, his teammate, by 52 seconds. It's the sort of race that drivers dream about. But if that was a race that Schumacher would have dreamt about, I guess probably his dreams would have been even better about the European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring the same year, 1995. The Nürburgring, it was the new Nürburgring and not the old one, and we'd gone there straight from a very warm climate to one that was bitterly cold. We needed our Damart underwear and anoraks, and we got neither. But Schumacher almost won the championship on his home ground in Germany. It was an absolutely brilliant race. The conditions were wet and slippery, but Jean Alesi took the race by the throat in the Ferrari, thanks to fitting slicks and being able to drive on them. And 3 laps from the end, Michael Schumacher caught Alesi after Damon Hill had ignominiously spun out of the race, and passed the Frenchman at the chicane in circumstances where I just wouldn't have thought it was possible to get through. I watched it happen, and I said to myself afterwards, after I talked about it, I don't believe it. But he did it, and he then, of course, went on and won the World Championship for the 2nd year in succession.
This is lap 65. 2 laps to go at the end of this one. And Schumacher... Yes! Michael Schumacher takes the lead in the Grand Prix of Europe, and the Benetton team go berserk with delight.
I've said what I think the greatest lap I've ever seen was, and I said that I think it would be difficult to say which the greatest race I've ever seen was, but Spain 96 wasn't very far off it. Barcelona is a circuit that Michael Schumacher seems to have made his own. I remember in 1994 he finished 2nd in the Benetton, notwithstanding the fact that it was jammed in 5th gear for lap after lap, and he managed to keep up almost his normal race speed despite that. But Spain 96 in the Ferrari was quite unbelievable. The weather conditions, rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain, and it fell mainly on Barcelona in 96, and it was literally like driving powerboats around the track. People were spinning off in all directions. But Michael Schumacher's drive in the Ferrari was absolutely supreme. He won his first race there. He beat Jean Alesi in the Benetton by 45 seconds, despite the fact that he'd got a misfire in his V10 engine and that he'd made a bad start. He'd gone down to 6th position. But by lap 12 he was in the lead. He'd passed Eddie Irvine, he'd passed Gerhard Berger and Damon Hill and Alesi and Villeneuve. And from that time on they never saw him again. It was an absolute driving tour de force.
Well, Alesi will probably be saying to himself, go carefully, Jean, because he's had collision after collision, and there is the Ferrari of Michael Schumacher, the fastest man on the track. His previous lap was 2 seconds faster than the 2 cars ahead of him. The genius of Michael Schumacher is making up for the deficiencies of the Ferrari, the handling deficiencies in the wet. He's got past Gerhard Berger, he's up into 3rd place, and he's right behind Villeneuve and Alesi.
Murray, we've talked at length about the careers, the highs and lows of Mansell, Hill, Senna and Schumacher, but there must have been other drivers who really made you stand up and shout over the years.
Oh, yeah, well, so many of them, Bruce. Where do you start? Where do you finish? I mean, I've hardly mentioned the Professor, Alain Prost, 4 World Championships, only beaten in championship terms by Fangio. Fabulous chap, wonderful smooth driver. Mario Andretti, we haven't had many American world champions, but 1978 was my first year, and that was his championship year. His teammate, Ronnie Peterson, he never won the world championship, but he certainly should have done. Stefan Belloff is a name that doesn't cross many lips, but if he had lived, he demonstrated in the Monaco Grand Prix in 1984 that he would have been a force to beat. And then there's the gritty, determined Australian, that's just 2 words to describe him, Alan Jones, world champion in 1980, and they still love him in Williams. Keke Rosberg, Finland, wonderful character. Gilles Villeneuve, you've never seen a more spectacular driver than him. John Watson, our own John Watson. There's hardly been a more emotional victory than John's at Silverstone in 1981.
The crowd roars, and the British Grand Prix has been won by a British car with a British driver. His name, John Watson.
And then there's little Jean Alesi. Mercurial is the word that you always want to put in front of him because he's a moody character, but very nice indeed. And when he got his drive with Tyrrell in 1990 and not only passed but led Ayrton Senna, Alesi in the Tyrrell and Senna in the McLaren, it didn't seem believable, but it happened.
So watch the lights and watch Berger and look for Senna. Berger gets away well. Up behind him is Alesi on the right. There is Martini. Senna is up on the right too. And now into the first corner. First goes Berger. No, it's Alesi. Alesi's gone through into the lead. A fantastic bit of driving.
Lots of people, including I have to say myself, never thought that Alesi was going to win a Grand Prix. But in 1995 at Montreal in Canada, he got it all together in the most emotional circumstances imaginable. He was driving a Ferrari, which was the car that Gilles Villeneuve won his first Grand Prix in Canada in. He was driving under number 27, which was Villeneuve's number. And Jean, of course, is French, and there's nothing that more than the French Canadians in Montreal wanted to see than Alesi in a Ferrari, number 27, winning in Canada, and he did.
Out of the hairpin, that's turn 10, up to the chicane, that is turn 11 out of 15. Jean Alesi potentially victorious, just a few hundred yards, because he's now up to turn 12. The Ferrari mechanics are already leaning over the arm curve, ready to greet him home, and what a hero he's going to be, not just here in Canada, but all around the world with Ferrari fans, and particularly, of course, in Italy. Jean Alesi wins the Canadian Grand Prix to euphoric applause all the way round. Everyone will be delighted.
And last but as ever by no means least, our own Johnny Herbert, the imp, the man always with a smile on his face no matter what the circumstances are. He had a very, very tough year in 1995 as number 2 to Michael Schumacher that he was never going to beat, but he did in Britain at Silverstone in 1995.
But here is Johnny Herbert, who in his 71st Grand Prix is virtually certain he's only got a few yards now between himself and the checkered flag. His first victory in the British Grand Prix. He's behind Olivier Panis in the Ligier Mugen, who is 6th. He's lapped everybody else, and that means to say that Panis will move up into 5th place. Heinz-Harald Frentzen will move up into 6th place. But the glorious winner of the British Grand Prix into the left-hander at Priory, into the left-hander at Brooklands. He now only has Luffield 1, Luffield 2 and Woodcote is going to be Johnny Herbert. And he knows it, he waves his hand. Well done, Johnny Herbert. Thousands of people here are saying that, and for Benetton, Johnny Herbert wins the British Grand Prix, and you can see how popular his victory is. He's a lovely chap, and he richly deserves it.
Murray, it's time to put you on the spot and ask you which of these drivers, if you had to choose one, has been your favourite over the years.
Not too difficult for me, actually, Bruce. Nigel Mansell. He's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. He has his deficiencies, don't we all? But he is my cup of tea for all sorts of reasons. One is that wherever Nigel was, something was going to be happening. He was going to be having a row with somebody. His wheel nut was going to be coming off. His wheel was going to be coming off. He was going to be passing Ayrton Senna. He was going to be winning his first Grand Prix for Ferrari in the most difficult circumstances. He was going to be falling out with Frank Williams, or he was going to be becoming world champion, and he did all those things. There's no grittier, there's no more determined, there's no more spectacular driver in the history of Formula One, in my opinion, and I loved him for it.
Well, once again, as the Union Jacks wave and the crowds roar, Nigel Mansell has demonstrated psychological superiority superiority over his double world champion teammate Nelson Piquet.
So, Mansell's your favourite, but if you had to name a driver who was the most awkward driver you had to deal with during your time, who would that be?
Nigel Mansell. Nigel Mansell could try the patience of a saint, and he did, and mine. He can be a very prickly bloke, and you had to know how to handle him, but I was and am very fond of Nigel, and hopefully I was able to do so. But and I used to interview him at every race, and we always had a sort of silent battle. Nigel always wore his sponsor's cap, and because he was paid £1 million a year or something like it to wear his sponsor's cap, he was determined that the sponsor's logo was going to appear in shot. And because it's against BBC policy for it to do so, I was determined that it wasn't going to appear in shot. So we had this situation where I would be talking to Nigel, and he would be sliding down in his seat with the cap getting lower and lower, and the camera would be getting lower and lower, until his chin was just about at the top of the table, but we normally managed to keep it out. And he had what to me was a very irritating characteristic, that you'd be about to start the interview when he would catch hold of the wire of the microphone and pull it down so that you went down. Or he would pull a funny face at you, or he would turn his cap sideways. But that was just Nigel Mansell's sense of humour, and if you learned to live with it, you always got the pearls of wisdom from the man who is destined to become world champion, and no one has given us greater satisfaction and entertainment, in my opinion.
Murray, in conclusion, when you decide that you've had enough, will you still visit the Grand Prix, or will you walk away like certain drivers do when the job's done?
In my worst nightmares, Bruce, I wake up and realise that I have had to stop commentating on Grand Prix. It's going to happen sometime, and I don't want it to happen because I adore every second of it. But I'm not a young man now, and Anno Domini is going to catch up with me. I am either not going to be physically able to keep up with it, or I'm not going to be mentally able to keep up with it. Hopefully I can do both those things at the present moment. But that time is going to come, and when it comes, I will revert to being what I was before, which was, and still am, an enthusiast. I love motorsport and I adore Grand Prix racing, and I will be there. I will ask Bernie if he can give me some sort of a pass, and hopefully I can get there and continue talking to my friends. I have two other things in the back of my mind. One is that I am an enormously proud member of the British Racing Drivers Club, which isn't an easy organisation to belong to. And the other is that I am the president of the British Motor Racing Marshals Club, and I would love to be able to devote time to both those things, and look forward to doing so.
Murray, I've asked you for your favourite driver, but is there one race that if you could really relive again, you'd pick?
Oh yes, and it's not difficult to decide which that is, Bruce. I'm an emotional chap, I'm not ashamed of it, and the race that has given me the greatest satisfaction, the greatest emotion, is seeing Damon win his World Championship at Japan in 1996, and that's the one I would love to see again.
He fought from second on the grid, he passed Jack Fielder, he took the lead, he stayed there, and Damon Hill exits the chicane and wins the Japanese Grand Prix. And I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
Murray Walker was in conversation with Bruce Jones. This audio, Murray Walker at the Beeb, was produced by Helen Stiles of Leisure Time Productions for BBC Worldwide.